But away from that, back to more pressing matters of national concern was a change of the board of the NNPC Limited, one that has now been receiving applause from plaudits all over, saying it is a silent decision. Now joining us on the program is Chief Madaki Omadachi Ameh, who is an oil and gas expert and the managing partner, BPH Consulting, to discuss the Ojulari 11-man board of the NNPCL and what they'll be doing differently from the outgoing GC of NNPC Limited, Nyele. Good morning to you, Chief, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now let's start with the plaudits this decision is receiving. It almost seems as a consensus nationwide applause for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, having changed the leadership of the NNPCL Limited. I don't know if you're part of those applauding this decision, and why do you think Nigerians are so elated at a change of management in the NNPCL?
Well, I guess that Nigerians are fed up, with the old board, led by Madaki. Incidentally, there was a lot of optimism when Kyari was appointed in 2019, by the previous government. And basically driven by his pedigree, when he was Group General Manager, Crude Oil Marketing, he generally had a good PR. People kind of saw him as a straightforward person, simple person who related well with the rest of the staff, and all of that, and considered him as a square peg in a square hole, and they expected a lot from him, but unfortunately he underperformed, in that role. Let me assure you. He's held that role of GMD of NNPC longer than any other person before him, and even when he attained the mandatory retirement age of 60 in January, for some inexplicable reason, the president, just let him continue, and people were worried, that the president was, doing it again, the same way he did it with the Inspector General of Police, and said he could stay on, and all of that, and other similar appointments, And, quite frankly, it's good for people to retire when they are supposed to retire, because if they don't go, they slow down those who are behind them and who are supposed to also progress. Even though, because of the selective retirement age thing, there's a lot of anomaly in the system right now, especially in the civil service, where some people retire at 70, others retire at 60, others retire at 65. Nobody understands what the retirement age is anymore since the commencement of this government, in 2023. Government policy is not supposed to be run on at a discretion of the president, the way it's been done at the moment. It creates a lot of distortions in the system, and it's also a bit unfair when politicians have no retirement age, but other people must retire, at
60.
At 60. And 60, quite frankly, is quite is a young age to retire, And because the program has extended the retirement age of a number of people, judges 70, professors 70, doctors 65, teachers who are not professors 65 and all that, it has led to a situation where I think the national retirement age now ought to be 70, because even at 70 people are still, strong, but that should apply to everybody, including politicians, so that the younger generation can have their space, to play their role. But going back to NNPC, yes, there was a lot of hope, on Madaki, but a lot of horrible things happened during that period. The subsidy scams, the humongous monies that people were making for doing next to nothing, the opaqueness in the running of the operations of NNPC.
And there was the change of price templates almost apparent.
Yeah, of course, so that also had to do with the subsidy, the end of the subsidy regime. And it was, it was a good idea, that finally we have a deregulated downstream sector of the Nigerian oil and gas industry. But the deregulation was done in such a chaotic manner that Nigerians were just suffering, and the benefits were not obvious. to the people. You don't increase the price of petrol by 600% without increasing the incomes of people by even 1%. Even the 70,000 naira minimum wage, which the government promised in July last year, has not been implemented up until today. And I think that's very unfair, because even at 70,000 naira at current exchange rates, that's so much lower than the UN threshold for poverty, which is living on $2 a day. $2 a day should translate to about $60 a month, and $60 a month is close to 100,000, at current exchange rates. So what we are saying in effect is that Nigeria is the poorest country in the world by offering its employees 70,000 naira minimum wage, which is about $35 in a month, which is barely just above a dollar a day. You get the point. So we don't, so people are just, there's a lot of hardship in the land. People are just, because Nigerians are highly resilient, they have had to recalibrate. There were very few vehicles on the road when the shock increase in pump price of petrol, which didn't need to happen and can still be brought under control. If we apply the right principles of petroleum economics, we can sell petrol for 300 naira, 350, per liter, and there will be no subsidy, and people, will run their lives. You get the point. But the strange argument that petrol will be too cheap in Nigeria and they will smuggle it across the border is such an insane argument that I can't even understand how a country, can punish its citizens just because they cannot police their borders, and also just because they cannot expand the scope of the business of the local businessmen operating in the downstream sector, for them to go and sell, the same product, in neighboring countries, legitimately, so that it's struck there. If there is no scarcity, there is no need for smuggling. You get the point. So these are so elementary that one doesn't even need. It's not rocket science. No one doesn't even need to analyze it. Even to the illiterate. But in Nigeria, the easiest things are the ones that are made most difficult. So yes, there's like a breath of fresh air. And it was cool as the way it happened, because the announcement was made very early in the early hours of yesterday. People just woke up, to see exactly.
Especially when the president was announced to be going on a
exactly to France. You get the point. His usual destination, and so it was a positive development, because Nigerians welcome change, But I want them to look at this with cautious optimism. Instead of the jubilation on the streets, I think it should be a period of cautious optimism. We have seen so many failed promises in the past. We have seen so many new beginnings, which ended up becoming, embarrassing, and replication of the old. Foisting on us a situation that is worse than it was, before we got into the situation. So, but what gives the sense of optimism for Ojulari becoming the group chief executive officer of NNPCL, is that he has pedigree.
Now let's talk about his pedigree in particular, because as a seasoned engineer, Bashir Bayo Ojulari has also had his time playing within the shores of the big oil companies, an ex-shell person in his stead. How much does this pedigree make him the square peg in the square hole for the position of GC of NNPCL?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. Bayo, incidentally, is somebody I know, and I know well. We used to work in Shell together. We're actually contemporaries in Shell. And, it's a quiet, achiever. He was MD of SNEPCO, that's the Shell Nigeria Exploration and Production Company, and he helped to up the production, by more than 30% during the period he was there, and within a very short period. And he also helped to reduce the operating costs drastically, by maybe like 40 or 50% while he was there. So he's known for efficiency, and he just gets the job done without making noise about it. So there's a lot of optimism about his entry into NNPC. And I think this also marks a paradigm shift from the appointments to the GCEO position that we have been seeing. Most of the times, those who become group chief executive officers of NNPC are organically grown, from in-house. So, they rise through the ranks, the NNPC, and then they get to the GGM level, and then somebody is appointed from there, based on connections and all of that. But if you really want to effect a change, in an organization like NNPC, you have to bring someone from outside who will be impatient with the sluggish, opaque manner in which the organization is run. And I think
that from a civil servant perspective, despite the change in nomenclature to limited,
yeah,
you feel that most of them still have that civil servant approach to the job.
Exactly. If the company was called NNPC and you just add an L at the end of the day, at the end of the acronym, to make it NNPCL, without a culture change, we're not going to expect too much of anything happening, so I don't really think that NNPC has changed just because they added an L at the end of the name. You get the point. A whole lot of work is required to be done in NNPC, to turn it around, and it's doable. The people are there, the energy is there if they are being led right, and I think that Ojulari will lead NNPC right.
Well, you vouched for his pedigree, having shared a past working relationship with him as to what Engineer Ojulari can do. He'll be chairing an 11-man board. And we also see the names of Amadou Musa Kidi, the non-executive chairman of NNPC Limited. How much can you speak for him as well?
I don't know him at all. I saw the name for the first time only yesterday. But again, that's a political appointment. He's not expected to be an oil and gas person. I don't think he's an oil and gas person, because I should have seen his name mentioned somewhere, but I've never ever heard his name mentioned, So obviously we are connected in government to be made chairman of the board of NNPC, which everybody considers a juicy, Nigerians talk about juicy, and I really laugh at juicy. Where is the juice coming from, for God's sake? Why are we so corrupt-minded? There are jobs that are juicy, there are others that are not juicy.
But when you draw the lines, especially on a petrol-dependent economy, and you see someone appointed as non-executive chairman of a board, that more or less is the mainstay of the economy. It's almost like the subtle Nigerian culture of saying it's juicy.
Well, I hear you. But every job should be squeezed. The juice should be squeezed out of every job.
Every job, regardless.
If you ask me, yes, we should squeeze out the juice from every job and let it just be to get the job done. We have been in this juicy situation for too long, and then some people just go there. When they hear that they've been appointed to a board, to do a government job, the first thing that comes to their mind is how much juice is there.
Exactly.
As long as we look at government appointments as a source for sucking the juice, this country is just going to remain the way it is. So I think that the overriding driving force for any appointment, is not the jubilation around, I finally got what I wanted, so I can squeeze out the juice, but it is to say, this is an opportunity for service, this is an opportunity to get things done in a better way so that we can move the dot. The dot is not being moved in this country at all. And that's why Nigerians are frustrated in the midst of so much resources. Nigeria should be better, better resourced, than even a country like the United States of America, honestly, if we are led right. But we are obviously not being led right. All the three hungry, greedy people who don't know when to stop. You get the point. But you see, it's still the same stomach. There isn't so much, there's a limit to what your stomach can take in a day. You get the point. But if you want to own the entire world just because they put you in a position at the expense of the people, then I think it's shameful. You know what I mean? So government needs to remove, the juice from the jobs and let it just be an honest job for an honest pay on a daily basis. We're not doing that at the moment. And one of the recommendations that I have actually that we should have a national minimum wage and a national maximum wage. If we have a national maximum wage which says, the president
can earn above that.
The president is the top civil servant in the country, and this is how much he earns.
You benchmark.
If you say the national minimum is 70,000, which I think is abysmally, shamefully low, for the kind of situation we are in at the moment. Then let's even say the president's who earns the most in the country is let's say 2 million naira in a month. And then you say, okay, fine, all your expenses must come out from this 2 million. And because the president is the top person and he earns 2 million naira, no other person should earn more than that. You know, no matter by whatever name. If you do that, then you have taken the juice out of the jobs, you know, and then you have been able to reduce the national budget, you know, drastically by doing that, because, you know, the politicians pay themselves any amount of money they like. I heard the senators earn 29 million naira in a month. That's almost 1 million naira a day. For doing what? For going there and telling us that the A's have it, the May's have it, in such a lame and almost, you know, comic manner of running, you know, proceedings in the National Assembly. It's shameful. Now to talk about, you know, the leaders of the House of Reps who earn over 20 million naira in a month, you know, and, you know, we're not talking even of the allowances and all of these constituency, you know, funds that get into their hands, and then they appropriate it to themselves through cronies, you know, and phony contracts, and nothing gets done. The budget for this year is, you know, is 50 whatever million, trillion, 52 or 53 trillion. They kept increasing the budget every other week until nobody was interested anymore in what the figure was.
Now, Chief Madaki, let's talk about the budget, because the economic indices that peg the spending of the country is also somewhat tied to the role the NNPCL would be playing, based on the amounts of projected barrels of day that we're hoping to get. I was looking at some of the targets Mr. President set for the Ojulari-led NNPCL, and he says that by 2027, we should hit 3 million barrels per day. The projections in 2025's budget is 2 million barrels per day, and even at that, we're falling short of hitting 1.8 million barrels per day. Do you think that, much like people have said, talking about the budget, that it is largely optimistic? This challenge set on the table of the Ojulari-led board to hit that 3 million barrels per day marker by 2027, I don't know, is it also over-ambitious? Is it doable?
Well, 3 million barrels a day is clearly doable, considering the size of our reserves, you know, and the fact that oil is easy to produce. You know, you drill a hole, using natural pressure brings most of the oil to the surface, unlike other countries where you have to put expensive pumps to pump out, you know, the oil. So, and because given Bayer's pedigree as someone who has optimized production in the past, you know, in a place like Snapco, which is largely deep offshore, you know, the Bonga field is one of the major production fields and all that. You know, is that even though Snapco is not a joint venture, you know, it's a PSC, it's a production sharing contract arrangement. So it's actually more like, you know, Shell, you know, it's a Shell International owned company, you know what I mean. So Nigeria is not part of that venture, apart from the fact that they share in they take their share of the crude oil production. So Bayer knows what to do, you know, to increase production, to increase efficiency, because the biggest problem of NNPC is lack of efficiency. They do not they operate like any, you know, disorganized, inefficient government establishment. So people are not driven by targets, you know, but they just ramble on and on a daily basis, you know, carry on as business as usual. So I think that 3 million barrels a day, even though extremely ambitious, but what it takes is just to optimize production from all the abandoned wells, you know, increase the level of bids, you know, that actual companies that are ready to produce, you know, have to make, you know, for new fields, and even the existing marginal fields, which are just left fallow. Most of the people who got marginal field licenses are not even producing those fields. You know, why won't the government, you know, through the Nigeria Upstream and Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, insist that all marginal fields must be optimized, and that even if there are no pipeline facilities to carry them to a flow station and then to a terminal, so for export, you know, because we have a budding local refining arrangement going on right now, and people are getting interested in local refining, why won't you get a marginal field, produce, and then refine right there on the field, so that your target is not to sell the crude, which I think is still a very inefficient thing to do. There's no reason why Nigeria should be selling crude. Because if you add value by refining 100% of your production, you get several times more money, you know, more revenue from selling refined products, you know, than you get by selling crude oil.
Now, that's an interesting point, especially following the way the NNPCL before Ojulari has managed that crude for Naira deal, especially with Dangote looking to be one of the biggest buyers for the crude that we have available now. do you think it was also poorly managed? I already hear you saying we should not be towing that line of exporting our crude.
Yes, I think I'm very impressed. You know, you're very well informed about the industry. You get the point. And I'm just saying that as an aside. You get the point.
I appreciate the compliment.
But having said that, it's shameful, you know, that the crude for Naira deal is not being allowed to see the light of day. It's one of those opaque things that NNPC does. You know, why would you be selling crude to local refiners in dollars? What are you even doing with the dollars? You know, we overhype the dollar in this country. You know, for me, you know, we should find a way of de-emphasizing a dollarized economy and let's strengthen our Naira properly. You know the point. If you start selling crude in Naira, it helps you to hedge against, you know, the vagaries of the foreign exchange market and then driving up the prices, you know, unreasonably, just because they are not able to manage the value of the currency properly. When the government came into existence in 2023, you know, the dollar was selling at maybe like 700 or 600 or something, you know, but now it's 1,600, you know, and then when it climbs up, you know, when it appreciates a bit and it now is like 1,500, 1,500 something, you know, people will be saying that the value is appreciating. But you have to be looking at the appreciation from the point where it was, you know, when this government took over. You know, we have seen a free fall of Naira, you know, with drastic consequences for the price of things in the market. Because most prices in Nigeria are indexed on the dollar because of the heavy dependence on imported products, which I also think is the wrong policy. Look at us, you know, we had achieved self-sufficiency in rice production in this country. Then suddenly the government comes and says, you know, because the bag of rice, by artificial, you know, managing, clearly not based on the fact that rice has suddenly become gold in the international market. The price now becomes 120,000 naira for a single bag of rice, you know, just because the exchange rate is wrong. You know, then suddenly, you know, the government opens up the floodgate for importation of rice again, and they say bring in everything. Don't even pay duty because we want to bring down the prices. You don't pay duty on the imported rice. The imported rice comes and competes with the local rice production, which people had already gotten excited about and started actually upped production drastically in spite of the poor security situation in the fields where people are supposed to be farming safely. You know, criminals go there and mow them down, you know, and then the government does nothing about it. We really have to see this country governed. As it is right now, we don't see governance. We just see, you know, ourselves running from day to day, and it's not right.
Chief Madaki, I really like this your analogy of rice production. Anyone watching now can relate because it's an equally consumed staple food in Nigeria, and people have complained about this price variation also with the interest of local production at heart. You've mentioned insecurity. Much like rice production, oil production also suffers security challenges, which over the years has been blamed for our shortfall in meeting the required targets. This morning, across majority of the papers, we saw commendations coming in from Tom Polo, who runs the Tantita Security Service, applauding this appointment of Ojulari. What does this speak to the security of oil production in the country? Do you see any correlation with us being able to peg these loopholes in which crude oil theft continues to thrive?
Well, I think Nigeria is the only country where crude oil is stolen. And so...
Why so?
I don't know, you know, very rare. You know, it's a very rare phenomenon. A lot of things are unique to Nigeria, like crude oil theft. It's so difficult to steal crude oil because it's a technical process. You get the point. To be able to tap into a production, a producing, you know, pipeline, and then take crude oil, channel it through, you know, hoses into a waiting barge somewhere, and then, you know, use tugboats to move the barge and then go and load the ship and take it away. It's a very complicated process. And you know, we have the Navy, we have all manner of security, you know, agencies.
Private ones like
exactly. I read that Tantita gets paid about 4 billion naira every month, you know, to police the pipelines, which they still doing efficiently, in my view. You get the point. You know, it's like more like money for the boys, you know, let you know, live and let live, you know, but you don't run security in that manner. And you see, securing pipelines is now no longer rocket science. Other countries have done it consistently, you know, through technology. Why are we not going that route? Why don't we have a monitoring system like they have in Saudi Arabia? And here we also have it here, but they just don't use it. The NNPC actually has the replica of that Saudi Arabia monitoring system.
Yeah, I remember the National Assembly deliberating on it, even from the loading points, even for trucks conveying the products across the country.
Exactly. You know, it's easy to track these things. It's easy to stay in a monitoring room and know exactly, you know, to the last, drop, how much production you have, where there's a disruption in the system, it shows, and then you send drones there or send security agencies there to go and deal with it. You know, but the process of stealing crude oil, which has thrived and been on all the while because security agencies, close one eye and let the badges pass. You know, the creeks are not so many, you know what I mean? And, you know, the ship that takes the stolen crude, you know, are not like a pin or a small canoe that you do understand? So for this to thrive, there has to be high-level complicity, you know, between the security agencies, the criminals, and then the big-pocketed people who are the beneficiaries ultimately of the stolen crude. You get the point? And I hear that Nigeria loses money through crude oil theft, and nothing is done about it. You know, and they're just discussing that if it's just, one of those things. You know, it pains me because I know that there are 100% solutions to this. You know, there's technology that can be used to frustrate whoever wants to steal crude. But people are feeling fat, not doing any work, but making, tons and tons of money, from just, being in the wrong place at the right time, and then, being in a chain of criminality that the government does nothing about, either due to lack of knowledge or indifference, or crass incompetence. You know the point. And I think most of the challenge that we have in this country in terms of bad governance is actually attributable to incompetence.
Now let's talk about one conversation a lot of viewers would be keen-eyed on. It's on the pricing, the pump price for premium motor spirit. It's one of the most sought-after commodity from our refined products. I don't think even AGO, despite its demand from manufacturers, has as much attention as PMS. Currently, the NNPCL is pegging it at 950 naira per litre. Going forward, what are your predictions in terms of the pump price of PMS under Engineer Ojulari?
Well, these days it's difficult to predict anything. You get the point. First of all, I think that 950 naira per litre, when NNPC is supposed to be producing locally, is too high. Because part of the promise they made, and the justification for spending, almost $2 billion, to turn around yet again turn around the refineries, which are
I like the emphasis on yet
again. Perpetually the refineries are in a state of being turned around. And when said that, Nigeria no longer even believe, that the refineries are up to any good. You get the point. I think that the government. The government should have kept faith, with the privatization of the refineries. If Yar'Adua had not reversed the sale of the refineries to Dangote, Dangote would not have needed to spend the money he spent building his own refinery. You get the point. He would have deployed just a fraction of that amount to optimize production in the existing refineries in Port Harcourt, and then, things would have had to happen. At the end of the day, private industry is the only way that things can work. Just imagine Dangote, the same Dangote, went to Peugeot Automobile in Kaduna and bought the factory. And now it's called the Dangote Peugeot Automobile Nigeria. And they are turning out cars, correct, clean, brand new cars, quietly. They're not even making noise about it. Most Nigerians are now aware that Peugeot is producing locally in Nigeria.
In Kaduna.
And in Kaduna. You get the point. And if we had the right exchange rate, then the cost of the cars would have been much lower, than they are right now. Well, even when fairly used cars are now selling in the 20s and 30s of millions, you get the point, like some even higher than that. What will you now say of brand new cars? And Nigerians deserve to drive brand new cars, on terms that are like similar to what happens in other countries, where people can finance, the buying of big assets. Nigeria is the only country where you want to go and buy a car. They say the car is 50 million and the dealer is expecting you to bring out, that kind of money. Go and transfer it to him on one day. Nobody does that now. You get the point. Even the richest of the rich in other countries have a way of paying small, gradually over many years, and it can still be done even in this economy. And that's what we try to advocate in some of the things that one is doing privately. Running cooperative societies, helping people to to pool their resources together, including intellectual resources, to see how we can optimize and make life livable for the average Nigerian. Because if you leave it to the government, honestly, people will suffer and groan for nothing. Because I don't see fire in the eyes of any of these ministers, to get things done positively for people. They just go to the office, do the same, work that their ancestors in that role had done in the past, and expect to see anything change. And it's not going to happen. So I think, the future still lies with, Nigerians taking their destiny in their own hands and telling themselves, drawing a line in the sand and telling themselves we will thrive, whether we have a bad government or a good government. When they do that, then gradually the governance system will refine itself, because people will virtually just ignore the government and just live their life. You get the point? But again, we live in an environment where the government is very hungry for money, and then they keep looking for ways of impoverishing and already impoverished people. For instance, there's a big hype about wanting to refine the tax system, so that they can collect more taxes and spend it frivolously as they are. You get the point? Like for me, bluntly, I don't think Nigerians should pay tax. Government does nothing for the average Nigerian. So why would you collect my money, if you are not doing anything for me? You are your own local government because you have to provide a road that leads to your house. You have to provide the water through a borehole. You have to provide your own security by fencing your house taller than the building itself. You have to provide schools through private schools because the public schools are not functioning. So those reasons that exist for taxation, don't exist here in Nigeria. Other countries collect taxes and they actually send people to prison for avoiding or evading taxes, because they know that they need those monies to be able to fund public services. And when those public services are not there, the citizens can be outraged about it and then demand accountability from their government. But here, it's just like shouting at a wall. Nobody's going to listen to you. And then no matter how much you shout, they will brand you maybe an opposition party member or somebody who is just disgruntled and a wailer or something, and then they just ignore you and nothing happens. So why should such a government come and be telling you, okay, they want to make the tax system more efficient, but you have to bring more people, widen the tax net so that even when we are poor mothers in the village and the farmers who are fighting the challenges of insecurity on a daily basis should now pay tax to some government so that they can spend it the way they can filter it away into their private pockets. It's shameful, and I think that people should pay more attention to this tax reform thing and tell the government honestly we don't want to pay you tax anymore. Look for your own money the way we are looking for our money on a daily basis. I don't know about you, but I'm 59 years old this year. I have not seen the impact of the national budget on my life for one day since I became an adult.
You're almost spending 60 decades on it.
Exactly, I'm getting to the 6th floor. What does the government do for people? Every year they go through this ritual of, arguing about the appropriation, they spend this on that, they spend that on that, and then they come up with an approved budget, and then they say the president has signed the budget, they clap for him. The year ends. You don't see the impact of the budget. And then the ritual starts again next year. I think we should stop this very inefficient budgeting system and then just run the country on an envelope-based budget where we want to list all the projects we want to execute. And then as people bid for
the capital expenditure.
Exactly. As people bid for execution of those projects, you allocate funds for it, from a pot of funds available. Because all these ones that padding the budget, which they do very badly. Most of the national budget figure is actually padded, and they know. There's a syndicate in the National Assembly that that is a budget padding syndicate. You pay a particular amount of money to some of the people in the committees, in the committees, and then the civil servants who work in in the National Assembly and who know how to pass budget. And then they inject some projects in here, put figures around them, and then you go back and collect the projects through phony contracts that never get awarded.
All these procurement frauds which are being looked into.
I don't think they're being looked into, quite frankly.
Now in closing, we have just about a minute to wrap it up. My final take on your charge to the NNPCL. It's been said that the sole importers of crude, people are asking that they remove their hand from the price setting. They say they can't be a player in the game. If you had to give your good old friend, Engineer Ojulari, a mandate, more like a friendly advice to him, what would be the core mandate, which would be saying between now and 2027, my good friend Engineer Ojulari, achieve this for Nigerians?
First thing will be to stop importing fuel in any form. We're still importing fuel. I was amazed that in the month of February, there was massive importation of refined petroleum products into Nigeria by NNPC. For what? You said you claim that your two refineries in Port Harcourt are already functioning. The one in Warri is also functioning. So why are you importing, refined products and frittering away non-existent or scarce foreign exchange? To compete with yourself and then to also compete with another refinery that's already optimized and churning out products. So where is the economics? Why wouldn't we even probe that fraud? Because clearly fraudulent to be importing products when you can produce the same products here in Nigeria. That's number one. Number two, look for for ways of optimizing the refining process in Nigeria so that you don't have to export crude. No matter how much money you are paid for exporting crude, it comes back to you, because at the end of the day, you are selling cheap, and then whoever is buying off you at those kind of prices, will be the one to take the benefit of the added value through refining. Indonesia used to be in OPEC. They were producing about 3 million barrels a day. They still produce just about 3 million barrels a day or more, a bit more. They exited OPEC close to 15 years ago because they now said it's important for us to refine all we produce. And they're making so much more money from refining, than they ever made, selling crude. So honestly, there's so much Barrow can do. But I also know that he knows what to do. So he should seek out good advisors. He should seek out people who genuinely want him to succeed, so that he can succeed in this way, because his success is then the success of the country.
Nigeria. Well, yeah. Chief Madaki Omadachi Ameh, we appreciate you for the salient points raised on the program, and good luck to your friend. We'll be looking out to see how well he succeeds in the job.
I believe he will succeed by the special grace of God.
Well, Chief Madaki Omadachi Ameh is an oil and gas expert who has also shared a working relationship with the newly appointed GCO of NNPCL, Engineer Bashir Bayo Ojulari, and vouches for his pedigree in being able to deliver on the job. Well, this conversation is available for you to rewatch it on our YouTube channel.